Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video on the Film Fanatic channel. It has been a while. A lot of movie and pop culture, content in general has just been dried up recently, but we're back with a new video idea. Today we're going to be ranking every single MCU movie in timeline order on a tier list. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So ladies and gentlemen, starting us off, we have got obviously Captain America, the First Avenger. This takes place in a World War II stricken America, and we've obviously got the Red Skull in this movie as well as the main villain. We've obviously got great side characters like Bucky Barnes and even Peggy Carter, and this movie really kicked off my love for the MCU as I did watch it completely in timeline order. So I'm going to put this movie at a B. I think it was solid. I think some parts were a little bit dragged out, but the transformation scene, he came from a skinny looking, he looked like a kid to be honest, and then he transformed into this muscly man, but that didn't transform any of his values or his ego. He stayed grounded. I love this film. I love the character development. This is easily a B for me. Moving on, we now have Captain Marvel. Now obviously in my eyes this character is incredible. I believe that she's easily one of the most powerful beings in the entirety of the MCU. Unfortunately, unlike Captain America, the villain was honestly really bad. Obviously, there was a bit of a juggle between who was the true villain. It was either obviously the Skrulls, which obviously ended up being a kind of refugee type story. They just wanted to protect their people. And then the Kree, which ended up becoming the main villain. I don't think that the main villain was menacing enough. And I do believe that this movie kind of dragged on in several parts. I do love the idea of seeing Nick Fury's origin firsthand. However, a lot of it was again dragged on. So in my eyes, this movie is good, but could have been better. I'm going to put it at a solid D. So moving on, we have progressed into the Iron Man trilogy, the first movie being Iron Man 1. For me, this is the best movie in the Iron Man trilogy. I love this movie so much. I think Robert Downey Jr. brought Tony Stark to life in such a fantastic way. The reason this is clear of both movies already placed on the tier list, the villain is so menacing. He's probably one of the most underrated villains we've seen in the MCU. Obadiah Stane, who was in close quarters of Tony, a security guard that ended up becoming jealous of how fantastic Tony truly was, ordered a hit with the 10 rings, which was obviously a huge part of this movie as well. Great movie, easily S tier for me. Now, fast forwarding into the next Iron Man movie is Iron Man 2. The villain was also pretty great here, but I didn't like how he was being supported by a side villain who wasn't all that interesting. This movie was amazing. It was really cool to see Tony racing on the F1 track in Monaco. I think that was a really cool detail in there. Pepper Potts and his relation gets, expanded a little bit more. We get the introduction of War Machine, Jim Rhodes coming in. He's easily one of my favorite characters in this film. This is a great movie, but it's not Iron Man 1 level. I'm going to put this at a solid A. Now, next up is easily one of my least favorite movies in the MCU, probably the worst one that they have made. This is easily an F. Not incredible at all, but it's the Incredible Hulk movie. This one was just shocking and just a snooze fest. And it's pretty obvious why they changed the actor to Mark Ruffalo after this one just failed with horrible writing, horrible character development, and there was just no real sense of direction in this film. I really didn't enjoy it at all. This is easily an F. Then we've got Thor. Now, unlike the Hulk, we got a great character played by a great actor in the form of Chris Hemsworth. Brought him to life. I love the idea of including Natalie Portman as Jane Foster, who's obviously Thor's, first love. It's interesting that they brought her in so early because we all know that she is the resultant love interest for Thor. I think it's a great film. Unfortunately, the villain in the form of Loki, which constantly changes between him and the Frost Giants, is a bit unclear. I think Loki could have been done better in this film, but it was a very emotional movie. I love it a lot, and I love the god/human dynamic, so I'm going to put this one at C. Next up, we've got one of the most iconic movies of all time, the Avengers movie. The first time we saw one of the most iconic groups meet up in a movie on the big screen. What a film. Villain was perfect. Loki obviously returning from the dead and conquering New York, and Iron Man obviously making that incredible sacrifice play. What a film this was. Incredibly emotional. I love this movie, and I think it is honestly the most influential film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So I'm going to put this one at an A and above Iron Man. Moving on, speaking of Iron Man, we go to Iron Man 3, and what a film this was. Easily my favorite moment in the Iron Man trilogy is the meetup of the Iron Legion, all of Tony's suits that he's used as a distraction from the constant battle we see with him with his anxiety from the New York events. It was just a beautifully well-made movie, very well written, and I love how War Machine had a bigger part in this, and the relationship between him and Pepper Potts obviously expanded a lot more. So for this movie, I'm going to put it in a below Iron Man 2. I just think Iron Man 2 is a better structured movie. Then we've got yet another fantastic movie in the form of Captain America the Winter Soldier. It was obviously so sad to see Bucky Barnes lose his life in the first movie, or so we thought, with him returning here as the main villain with the help of Black Widow, Sam Wilson and Nick Fury all on Captain America's side. I will say this once and I'll say it again. Steve Rogers, Captain America, Chris Evans' portrayal of both those characters, easily one of my favorites in the entirety of the MCU, and this movie is so well made. I mean, the CGI in this was at a minimum, it was a lot of practicality. The combat in this film, oh my god, the choreography, especially in that night fight, what a beautiful set of display of skill and quality in this film. I'm gonna put this in the S tier and ahead of Iron Man 1. However, unfortunately, the dynamic from an incredible movie to unfortunately not such an incredible movie is brought back with Thor Dark World coming up next. This movie was a snooze fest. I think it was just so similar to the first one that we couldn't really base off anything. Unfortunately as well, the villain was horrendous. It was cool to see the Reality Stone make its first appearance in the MCU, but it just wasn't the way it should have been. I'm gonna put this film at E. Next up, it's one of the best franchises in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and Guardians of the Galaxy 2. I love this group. I love this team. They're just so funny, so comedic, and so, petty. I mean, I love their chemistry together. The action that we've seen in both of their films is probably the most beautifully choreographed action that we've seen. The visual effects in Guardians of the Galaxy is easily the best, and I don't care what anyone says. So I'm going to put this film at the A tier, and I'm going to put it below the Avengers. Moving on to Volume 2, we obviously got the entity, the most powerful entity, called Ego. This sends Peter Quill over the edge. I love the father-son dynamic in this. It's orchestrated so realistically, and it really resonated with me. Personally, it impacted me a lot, so I'm going to put Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 ahead of Avengers 1. We then move on to our next Avengers movie, Avengers Age of Ultron. I love how we got introduced to 3 new characters in this one, which was Wanda Maximoff, Pietro, who was obviously Quicksilver, as well as Vision. Obviously, Wanda and Vision are the only 2 who made it out of that, with Pietro losing his life in this film.
You didn't see that coming.
Ultron is such a menacing villain, and Tony Stark's worst nightmare came to life. He endangered his people, he endangered his country by his own creation. So I'm going to put this movie at an A. I'm going to put it below the first Avengers movie. Now, moving on to one of my favorite franchises in the entirety of the MCU, AntMan. What a brilliant film this truly was. I mean, no one expected it because he's not quite a popular or fan favorite character, but when he came in, played by Paul Rudd, it's the perfect casting. It was such a funny movie, so brilliantly made. I love the chemistry between all the characters. So this movie for me is easily going to slot into the A tier. And I'm going to put it ahead of the first Avengers movie. I loved it that much. Now, as we approach the halfway mark, we've now got Civil War, and this movie was so polarizing. You had the likes of Captain America and Iron Man obviously being split up, and then you had so many side characters who are on 2 different sides but all want the same goal, and that is just to be a team. Obviously, that wasn't possible with the Accords coming in and the registration. Team Cap obviously being against it, but Team Iron Man being on it. Spider-Man's first introduction into the MCU, which was huge because he's obviously a fan favorite character. So for me, this movie brought out the best out of both characters. So I'm going to put this in the S tier, and I'm going to put it ahead of Iron Man and Captain America. Moving on, speaking of Spider-Man, we've got the first Spider-Man film. I love how we got to see a father-son dynamic between Tony Stark and Peter Parker. I love that Peter was obviously donning the suit while Tony knew he wasn't ready for it, but he proved himself at the end. The Vulture was an amazing villain. I hope he comes back. I can't wait to see more from him. So, you know what? This was a pretty solid movie. I'm going to put it at the B tier though, because I don't think it's the best Spider-Man movie. I'm going to put it ahead of the first Avenger. Then we've got Doctor Strange, the most pleasing to the eye film I have ever seen in the MCU. The CGI in this, the VFX, the practicalities, and just watching the magical elements of the mystic arts unfold right before your eyes. It was just such a pleasing movie to watch. I love this film. It was honestly one of my favorite films in the MCU. So I'm going to put this in the S tier. I'm going to put it ahead of Iron Man. Next up, we got Black Panther, one of the most influential and powerful movies that we see in the MCU. He played T'Challa's Black Panther to a perfection. He was a warrior on screen, a warrior off screen. He's easily such a respectable, not only a character, but a respectable actor behind the incredible character of the Black Panther. So for me, this is easily a S-tier movie, an amazing villain to go with it, and an amazing side cast of Okoye and Shuri. So I'm going to put this ahead of Doctor Strange. Next up, we got Black Widow. It was a long time coming. This film should have come a lot earlier, and unfortunately, it resulted in a little bit of a disappointment. Yelena, who is obviously Black Widow's sister, kind of outshined Natasha in her own movie, which was a bit disappointing, but I still enjoyed it. I wouldn't say it's better than Captain Marvel though, so I'm going to put it in the D tier. Next up, coming to the business end of this list, is Thor Ragnarok, my favorite movie in the MCU to watch. Not necessarily the best movie, but the comedy in this was fantastic. The villain was amazing. Hulk being in it, Surtur, Valkyrie. It just had everything. It had it all. There's no way that you can watch it again without having a little bit of a laugh and enjoyment. It's an amazing film, beautifully shot, and the vibe in it is just immaculate. So I'm going to put it in the S tier, and it's going to be the top for now. Now, approaching the end of the Infinity Saga, it's Infinity War, and what a film. The best film in the MCU, undoubtedly. Not only does this film have the highest budget in cinematic history, but it uses it to perfection. I mean, I never believed I could see the things I saw in this film on a movie screen. It looked so realistic, yet so unfathomable. No one could really comprehend what we were seeing. And for the first time, our heroes lost, which left a huge cliffhanger for 1 year before they made the masterpiece of Avengers Endgame. You know what? Let's do Endgame right now. Easily one of the most powerful films in the history of cinema. We got to see so many callbacks to so many old characters. The time travel aspect was done perfectly. It was a very risky option, and they did very well with it. I'm going to put it in the S tier, and I'm going to put it right below Infinity War. Alright guys, so next we've got Ant-Man and the Wasp, and this movie, I thought that was pretty good, but I think it came in a point where obviously Endgame and Infinity War had that grey area in between, so a lot more people were anticipating Endgame than they were anticipating this one. I think that the inclusion of Janet Van Dyne, who's obviously the mother of Hope Van Dyne, was pretty cool, and I can't wait to see what they do in Quantumania, but as a film, I don't think it compares to the first Ant-Man movie, and for that reason, I'm probably going to put it in C. I'm going to put it ahead of Thor. Then to follow up, we've got Spider-Man Far From Home. I love this movie. It's probably my favorite Spider-Man movie after the one right after it. And it easily is just such a fun, exciting movie. You've got Jake Gyllenhaal playing Mysterio. Nick Fury's in it as well. You've got Happy. I mean, I love the emotion that we see in this after the loss of Tony Stark. Peter trying to deal with the guilt of his loss whilst also confessing his love to MJ. Another great thing about Far From Home is that it leads directly into No Way Home. So for Far From Home, I'm going to give its ranking a solid A. I'm going to put it at the top of A. I really love this film. Now into our final five, Spider-Man No Way Home has to be S tier, but does it compare to Infinity War and Endgame? I think it's just below it. Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield reprising their roles. What a beautiful thing to experience, especially in the theater. Everyone goes crazy. I mean, it was just such a fan-serviced film. Then you've got Thor Love and Thunder. I don't think it's better than Ragnarok, but I think it's pretty similar. I think, Thor Ragnarok, the great thing about it was that it had the great balance of comedy, action, and emotion, whereas Thor Love and Thunder had way too much comedy, very little emotion, and, a right amount of action. So I'm going to put Thor Love and Thunder below Civil War and below Ragnarok. Now, into our final three, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. This one had crazy expectations. I don't think it lived up to it though, unfortunately. Take full effect of that. I think they focused way too much on Wanda's story when they could have brought in a lot more multiversal aspects. I don't want cameos in every Marvel film, but in this film, when you're exploring the multiverse, you really need to show its infinite possibilities when they only went to one universe that actually stayed in, and they obviously came up against the Illuminati, who all passed away at the end of the film. So, for Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, I thought it was a great story, but I think it was a bit underwhelming, so I'm going to put it in C, at the top of C. Then moving on, we got ShangChi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This movie is super underrated. I can't believe people aren't ranking this higher on their list. I think that in terms of VFX, this is the best film, the most beautiful one to look at. And as a movie as well, I mean, I love the dynamic where he's trying to forget his backstory, but he can't run away from who he truly is. And then he obviously ends up with the 10 rings, and I love all the side characters. This movie is an A for me. I'm going to put it at the top. Now, I can tell that S and A are pretty crowded, so we're going to drop a few movies. I think that I'm going to drop Iron Man 3 to a B. I think that Doctor Strange isn't an S tier movie. It's still a great one though. Iron Man 1 is also pretty... No, Iron Man 1 deserves to be S. It's a bit tough because, you've got a lot of films here Do you drop them down a tier? I think there are a few. I think Far From Home should be at the top of B. And I also think that Avengers Age of Ultron should be at the top of B. Yeah, it looks a lot better. But something that doesn't look better is Eternals. It's our next review here. Overhated in my eyes. I think it's a pretty good story, but they compacted way too much into one movie. If it was in 2 movies, we'd be talking about a different type of story. I still enjoyed it. I'm gonna put it at a solid C, and I'm gonna put it at the bottom of C. So ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be my list. Let me know if you guys want me to do this for a series as well, or MCU series, or maybe even expand it into the DC universe, or even just films in general that I love. Make sure to check out all my social links. Follow me on Instagram, follow me on TikTok. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.